But here, let's hear our text this morning, both from Isaiah and Luke. So, from the book of Isaiah, God is indeed my salvation. I will trust and won't be afraid. Yea, the Lord is my strength and my shield. He has become my salvation. You will draw water with joy from the springs of salvation. And you will say on that day, thank the Lord. Call on God's name, proclaim God's deeds among the peoples, declare God's name is exalted. Sing to the Lord who has done glorious things. Proclaim this throughout all the earth. Shout and sing for joy, city of Zion, because the Holy One of Israel is great among you. And from the Gospel of Luke, this is the second half of John the Baptist's conversation at the Jordan. Then Jordan said to the crowds who came to be baptized by him, "You brood of vipers, who warned you to escape from the angry judgment that is coming soon? Produce fruit that shows you have changed your hearts and lives. And don't even think about saying to yourself, 'Abraham is our father.' I tell you that God is able to raise up Abraham's children from these stones. The axe is already at the root of the trees. Therefore, every tree that doesn't produce good fruit will be chopped down and tossed into the fire." The crowd asked him, "What then should we do?" He answered, "Whoever has two shirts must share with the one who has none, and whoever has food must do the same." Even the tax collectors came to be baptized. They said to him, "Teacher, what should we do?" He replied, "Collect no more than you are authorized to collect." The soldiers asked, "What about us? What should we do?" He answered, "Don't cheat or harass anyone, and be satisfied with your pay." The people were filled with expectation, and everyone wondered whether John might be the Christ. John replied to them, "I baptize you with water, but the one who is more powerful than me is coming. I am not worthy to loosen the straps of his sandal. He will baptize you with Holy Spirit and fire. The shovel he uses to shift the wheat from the husks is in his hand. He will clean out his threshing area and bring the wheat into his barn. Then he will burn the husks with a fire that can't be put out." With many other words, John appealed to them, proclaiming good news to the people. This is the word of God for us this day. A number of years ago, I was driving home from the East Coast and took a circuitous route to see my brother. And on the North Fork of Long Island, I saw a sign and I had to turn in. It was the cutest little library with a book sale sign. In I went, and I perused the things that were for sale and decided upon a cassette of short stories. Yes, it was that long ago that my car had a cassette player. And on that series of short stories we listened to, well, they were a little bit on the sci-fi side of things, which isn't generally my genre, but my son was with me, and that's his genre, so we listened in. And one of the stories, I only remember one story on that cassette. Don't think I still have it. I do have a cassette player, not in my car. Uh, but one of them was about a care home of sorts for men. And all of the men who were in this care home had bodies that didn't just work anymore, either from injury or illness. Some were grumpy, some were angry, some were frustrated with their bodies and therefore everyone else. Others were apathetic and resigned to do nothing with their lives because their bodies couldn't do the things they wanted. One day, a doctor appeared and told them all that he could make their bodies well. Muscles and nerves could be repaired that was new and, well, rather miraculous. The conversations amongst the men were animated and new possibilities were talked about. Finally, I'll be able to. Dreams took root. Anger became excitement. Apathy became enthusiasm. The men each signed up for appointments with the doctor to get their assessment and then to schedule the procedure. One after another, they decided not to have the procedure. It wasn't that it was too risky to their bodies. Yes, they believed the doctor could heal their bodies. Every indication was such. But there was a catch. Once they went through the procedure, they would have no memory of who they were. They would get the details, of course. Your name is John Smith. You were born on February 2nd, 1847, or whatever it is. They would get the details that they have to work from. But the little stuff, like a smell of roast beef, it would no longer bring an image of grandfather carving the Sunday roast. Spring birds would no longer remind them of the moment they fell in love. The smell of oil and grease would not bring back memories of their friends as they worked on their cars. Thunder wouldn't be filled with foreboding, and heartache and loss would be no more. It would be no more a painful reminder of love lost. Each man decided against the procedure. The joy of jumping rope again, or simply tying their shoes without help, or moving independently was not enough. They came to understand that joy is more than they thought. Joy comes from being known and loved and cared for. Deep joy comes from belonging in and in our belonging. That's when we make a difference in the world. The doctor in the story did not heal their bodies, and yet without a cut of a scalpel, he healed their souls. Restoration is what John comes to the River Jordan to talk about. And he says, when you look at the word restoration, it's restoring, making a new story in your life. And that's what John invited everyone that was there with him. And I know that we have folks that are deeply connected to Hallmark here. And I do not know, and you can, Denise, I'm going to ask you to check for me with the Hallmark thing. I do not think Merry Christmas, you brood of vipers, has made it onto a Hallmark card yet. I just don't think it has. So it makes me wonder if we're looking for the wrong kind of joy. If we're looking for the wrong kind of joy in the midst of the holiday season, we look for the big stuff, the joy that comes with bells and whistles, that bows and ribbons and perfect moments, like those that are depicted in a Hallmark card or those that are on every commercial you watch. I want to know, has anyone made coffee in their home and had everybody wake up and go, every Folgers commercial, my entire life at Christmas time, somebody comes home. Katie, Kyle, you're home from college. Have you made coffee and had your entire family wake up and go, no, I don't think so, right? But that's the image we get, right? We're projected that image. If you look out on Christmas morning and there it is, the car with the bow, life will be good. Did you talk about that with your spouse? That expenditure? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. We look for those perfect moments and we seek that kind of joy out. We try to create it. And for some, those moments become moments of anxiety and stress whenever our focus shifts from the important thing. Remembering that the one who created the universe, the entire universe, came as a simple child, vulnerable and frail, the one who brought joy as babies are wont to do. There were no bells or whistles, no bows or roast beast. There were no trees or tinsel, just a single candle of hope that lit the way to the stable. Just two candles that shone for Mary and Joseph so they could see and be seen, and a third candle that was added as the star shone and the angel sang. This is the one who is coming again and again and again to bring joy into the world. Trusting this, that Christ will come and has come and will come again, we hear John's words to the crowd, and instead of "you brood of vipers," we hear words of inclusion, because his words are addressed to the children of Abraham, those of the covenant. It says, "You call yourself that, then be that." And John, as things I read this week said, underscores the openness by including members of professions that were understandably suspect: tax collectors and soldiers. Both worked for the Empire of Rome. Both kept order for the Roman occupiers, and both were viewed as enemies or traitors to the Jewish community. The fact that John includes them here is a powerful and even startling statement. Other times the tax collectors, and so mostly the tax collectors are mentioned, they're those guys, right? They're over there. And the soldiers, the one time we see soldiers in our story is at the crucifixion, right? Out there, something else. And John includes them. It's in the very beginning of the Gospel of Luke, and it says that Luke's vision that will be laid out both in the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts, it's a two-part story, that salvation is universal. Salvation is for everyone. This is good news, my friends, because that means it includes us too. All are included to the restoring of their life. The question is there in the middle of the text, but what are we to do? They asked it then, and we ask it now, and it'll be asked anytime we lose sight of Christ's call on our life. We're asked to change our hearts and lives and live in ways that are in line with the will of God, to love and care for one another. If you have two coats, give one away. Don't cheat, dear tax collectors and everybody else. Don't be abusive and exert power over others, dear soldiers and everybody else. The rules are simple, but the challenge is great. But there's joy. There's joy in it because it says we can do it. I mean, Chris and I were talking about the basketball team last Tuesday night. Was that Tuesday night they played Wisconsin? They played Wisconsin Lutheran. Oh, what a game! Those boys from Wisconsin Lutheran could just shoot 3 points without any. I think they only recruited people that could shoot 3 points, right? But from the coach's standpoint, you sit there and tell them what you can do. You can play your best game. You can bring your best forward. Will that win the game? Not necessarily on the scoreboard. Will that win the game for you as an athlete, as a person? Absolutely. John doesn't say these things to the people because they can't do it. He says, change your heart because you can do it. And I am so grateful for that. The possibility that lies in each of us that we can do it. But then John goes on and says something about wheat and chaff, not chafe. We know what that is. Chaff, right? And that the chaff's going to be blown away and burnt, right? And so I read this week from the Salt Project, these words that I think are really interesting. Every grain of wheat has a husk. And farmers, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, even today use wind to separate the husks, collectively known as chaff. You don't eat that part, it's undigestible. The grain, the goal of being, of course, is to save every grain, not separate good grain from bad grain. Just get the chaff out of the way. And it's a metaphor, this author thinks, for the cleansing and preservation, not division. The wind and fire remove the husks, the anxieties, self-absorption, or greed that makes us less generous, less fair, and less respectful of others. The author goes on to say that Alexander Solzhenitsyn, how many of you know who Alexander Solzhenitsyn is? Some. Alexander Solzhenitsyn was a Soviet author who wrote The Gulag Archipelago is one of the books that he wrote. He was considered a dissident by the Soviet Union and a prolific author who took refuge, I believe, in England. But he wrote about the human capacity for good and evil. And I think he said it correctly when he states that the line between good and evil doesn't run between groups. It runs right through the heart of every person. What each of us requires is restoration, liberation from what husks are holding us back. And sure enough, in the Gospel of Luke and Acts, that's exactly what happens. Wind and fire come on the day of Pentecost, right? Wind and fire come not to destroy, but to sanctify, to refine, challenge, restore, and empower. So when we look at that wheat and chaff that Jesus is going to put his shovel to, that's for restoration. That's for goodness, not division. So there's joy in our text. We're all included in the call for restoration, and there's hope for us and humanity. John's challenge is in itself dignifying, since it presumes we have the capacity to rise and meet the challenge, to become even more generous, more honest, more respectful of people God created us to be. That's good news. That is good news, you brood of vipers. You brood of vipers. The men in the science fiction story sought joy thinking that they didn't have it because of the limitations of their body. Perhaps we too miss the joy thinking we need something else that we don't just have. But we, like the men, hopefully realize that joy is already there. It's inside each one of us when we allow ourselves to be enfolded in the love of God. And from that place, begin a process of restoration for ourselves and living, loving as beloved, and knowing that change is possible. That justice and compassion are the ways to make God's love known in the world. This is joy, my friends. You brood of vipers. I'll never look at you the same. Brood of vipers. You go there. I went home today and my pastor called me a brood of vipers. I was a brood of vipers. That's good news. Because you, my friends, can and will and do change personally and corporately. That is good news. That is joy.